Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Bo, here with another cult movie review. Thanks for checking out this video. In today's review, I'm going to be checking out the 1985 action film Death Wish 3. Having already reviewed the first two installments of the franchise, I thought it was about time that I sat down and revisited Death Wish 3. And I'm looking forward to getting into it. Just before we do, if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel. All the support is greatly appreciated. So, Death Wish 3 from November 1985 was a movie that was directed by the late Michael Winner and was based on the screenplay by the writer Don Jacoby. Following the financial success of Death Wish 2, the production company Cannon Films announced a further sequel with a returning Charles Bronson back in the lead role. As for the story, it once again followed the middle-aged architect Paul Kersey, this time traveling to New York to visit his friend Charlie. Now, this was pretty significant considering that this was the first time that Paul Kersey had returned to New York City following the events of the original Death Wish in 1974. Paul was expecting to have a nice, peaceful trip. But of course, things didn't go according to plan. Once Paul arrived at Charlie's place, he found him bloody, beaten, and basically left for dead. Before Paul could find out who was responsible, suddenly the cops showed up and arrested Paul, thinking that he was responsible for what happened to Charlie. Of course, Paul, pleaded his innocence. He said he obviously wasn't involved. He literally just showed up. But, the police weren't having any of it, and they took him straight downtown. Once he arrived, he was grilled and subsequently beaten by the other detectives. They weren't buying his alibi. And this was the point where we were introduced to the Chief Inspector, Richard Schreiker. He was an officer who recognized Paul from years earlier when he was a rookie cop. He knew about Paul's past and knew exactly how dangerous he was. Paul, of course, denied all of this initially, pretending that he was just a regular guy who got caught up in this mess. But Schreiker, once again, like the other detectives, weren't buying his alibi. Now, because the crime rates were rapidly increasing, Schreiker, the police inspector, was under pressure to basically show results, to clean up the streets. Even though he had increased the police numbers, crime was still up and something needed to be done. So the inspector decided to take drastic measures, and this was where Paul Kersey came into the equation. You see, Schreiker knew how dangerous Kersey was. He knew what he was capable of. And so he decided to let him loose on the streets so he could basically kill some street thugs. As long as Paul reported back to Schreiker and kept him in the loop, Paul Kersey was free to do as he pleased. After thinking about it, Charlie agreed and went on his way. He took refuge in his friend's apartment and started planning on how to, take out these street thugs in this all-out assault. Paul knew what needed to be done. And, he didn't have to worry about any repercussions this time from the authorities. He was very much protected. We saw several altercations where Paul Kersey, armed and dangerous, ended up taking out a bunch of street trash and scumbags in an effort to clean up the streets. Thanks to Charlie's neighbors, Paul was even able to get hold of some serious weaponry, including a old World War II machine gun. But as you can imagine, once the street thugs started getting taken out one by one, well, all of the criminal gangs started to panic. They weren't just going to let this old random dude start shooting and killing everyone. No, they weren't going to allow that to happen, so they decided to take revenge on Paul, which led to an all-out war. I mean, houses were destroyed, cars were blown up, police officers were killed. I mean, this was no joke. This was total mayhem. It was a war zone, basically. And Paul Kersey was right in the center of it. So when it comes to Death Wish 3, this was the last in the series to be directed by the late Michael Winner. And unlike the previous installments, the first two movies, where they were a lot more grounded, in personal tragedy and failures in the justice system, Death Wish 3 kind of stripped all of that away and heavily leaned in to the spectacle of it all. This time around, it was much more of an action fantasy rather than a vigilante, realistic drama. And, I kind of thought that was quite an interesting direction to take. When you think about it, times have changed since 1974, when the original Death Wish was released. By the mid-80s, there was a consumer boom period. MTV was very much in full swing, and Death Wish 3 was very much a reflection of that. While this movie, upon its release, was very polarizing and received quite a lot of criticism, regardless, when it came to box office sales, this was a successful box office movie. It made money. And I think with that, it could be argued that it proved Michael Winner was right in taking a different approach when it came to this sequel. I could be wrong, but I don't think a realistic, low-budget drama about vigilantism as a Death Wish sequel would have been any more successful than what we got with Death Wish 3. I wasn't around at the time, but from all the research that I've done, I think it would be fair to say that at the time, audiences were very much, wanting excessive, action-packed movies. And, well, that's exactly what they got with this one. Now, I have to take a moment to talk about the film's score that was basically a mishmash of themes recycled from the Death Wish 2 soundtrack. Now, the legendary guitarist Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin was once again credited for his work, even though this time around in Death Wish 3, he had no direct involvement. Now, that's not a bad thing, because the music, the themes that Jimmy Page came up with for Death Wish 2, I loved. I thought they were amazing. So to recycle that and reuse that again for this one, not a problem. Now, the actual man that was behind the rearrangements for this film was the composer Mike Moran. And I must say, he came up with some very interesting themes himself, specifically the intro and outro theme that we heard. I was expecting something kind of rock orientated, kind of in your face. But instead, Moran came up with this, and how would you describe it? This kind of melodramatic, jazzy theme that just felt so random. This was a violent, action-packed movie with blood and guts and murder and explosions and guns and all kinds of stuff. Yet, with this theme, it was more suited for like a afternoon, daytime TV soap opera or something like that, you know? But I'm not hating on it because after watching Death Wish 3 for, several times now over the years, the theme's kind of grown on me, you know? Du- 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 da- 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 du- 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 du. Yeah, it's very unique and kind of like it's so bad it's good kind of thing. Now, while some of the filming did take place in New York City, the bulk of the production actually took place in London, England, to cut costs. If you look closely in some of the wide shots, you actually can see central London in the background. And yeah, I mean, it is what it is. As I said, it was kind of offbeat. It looked like New York, but it wasn't. It kind of reminded me something like Friends, when they would, do those outside shots, and clearly it was just a studio inside Los Angeles. But, it kind of looked like New York, but it wasn't. And it's kind of the same thing here. When it comes to the performances, Charles Bronson delivered a solid and well-rounded performance as Paul Kersey. At the age of 64, I thought, for the most part, Bronson was still able to, get physical and look pretty commanding without looking silly or, stupid. It certainly at times was a physical role. There was a lot of running and jumping and stuff like that. And of course, Bronson had, a stunt double, but he was still very much there in the action. You could see that. And yeah, I mean, for a guy of his age, he clearly had to be in shape to pull off what he did. Now, Bronson did get some criticism for his performance once the film was released. And you had many people basically saying that Bronson looked kind of tired and uninterested. Now, for me, while I can kind of see that viewpoint, ultimately, if you really think about it, his performance wasn't too different from his performance in the first two movies. I mean, let's be honest here, guys. Bronson wasn't known for his, big dramatic monologues and speeches. No, he was known for his stoic performances. And that's what you got once again here in Death Wish 3. Yeah, I'm not going to say that Bronson delivered, an award-worthy, Oscar-winning performance. Absolutely not, no. But he suited the role. He, once again, delivered what we expected of him. And yeah, I kind of thought that the criticisms that he received at the time were kind of unfair. Now, I wanted to mention the actor Kirk Taylor, who played the memorable villain, the Giggler. This was a scumbag who terrorized all the residents and eventually became a target for Paul Kersey. The role was limited, but Taylor made it his own. He didn't waste any screen time that he was given. He was very memorable and stood out amongst all the other kind of low-level street thugs. Now, the Giggler would eventually get his comeuppance and get shot and killed by Paul Kersey using this semi-automatic Magnum pistol. This was a great scene, one of the best in the entire movie. A scene that you can just, rewatch again and again. And yeah, I found it highly amusing with the Giggler literally running off, giggling. He'd stolen Paul's Nikon camera, and then out of nowhere, bam! He then had all of the locals suddenly rush out onto the streets and start celebrating. They're all happy. And you had this upbeat music kind of kicking into the background. It was like this triumphant moment. Yeah, hey, the giggler is dead. It's like, what? It was kind of ridiculous, but highly amusing. And then right after that, another brilliant moment when you had all of the remaining gang members huddled around together, grieving the loss of the giggler. And you then had one guy in particular who just... oh man, this guy was mad, man. His friend had died and he wanted everyone to know about it, man. He was like, they killed the giggler, man. They killed the giggler! Oh, bro. Oh, amazing stuff. And talking of gang members, there was a young Alex Winter from Bill and Ted fame who also appeared in the film as the character Hermosa. Now, this was another limited role, very small, minor role. We didn't really see Alex Winter that much. But like his co-star, Kirk Taylor, he made the most of his screen time and was also quite memorable. When it comes to the other cast, I really liked Ed Lauter, the actor who played the Chief Inspector Richard Schreiker. He was this hard-nosed cop that didn't mind bending the rules to get results. He had this no-nonsense approach that really suited the kind of vibe and tone that Michael Winner was going for this film. And it was certainly great to see the character team up with Paul Kersey at the end to take out the bad guys. One thing I've always found very amusing when it came to this film was its ending. Now, you had Inspector Schreiker tell Paul Kersey to make a quick exit, to leave right away because, the cops would be after him. He'd killed enough people. So, yeah, makes sense, right? So Kersey, agreed, and suddenly left. But then in the next shot, right before the title credits, appeared on screen, we saw Kersey changed in his clothes with his suitcases, casually walking off. I just find it funny because, I swear, the inspector told him, quick, go now before you get arrested. So when did Kersey get the opportunity to, change his clothes and pack his bags? What? Also, considering that he would be a wanted man and, all the police cars were, closing in on the scene, Kersey just, calmly walked away. It's like, he wasn't eager to, run off. And, it's just kind of ludicrous, but, it's just funny stuff, man. Funny. And so, dislikes for Death Wish 3 from 1985. My biggest dislike for the film would have to be the romantic subplot between Paul Kersey and the character Catherine Davis. So we had this public defender who was played by actress Deborah Raffin, who got acquainted with Paul Kersey initially at the beginning of the film when Paul was arrested. It was a small scene, not really, significant in any way. But then later on, the Miss Davis, the public defender, showed up outside Paul's apartment and right then and there wanted to go on a dinner date with him. This would spark a relationship between the two, which, to be very honest, it felt very forced and just kind of unnecessary. I mean, even creatively, it was kind of just random. You know, she just shows up, this woman who doesn't really know Paul Kersey and wants to go on a date with him. Okay. What also didn't help matters was the fact that both actors, Raffin and Bronson, didn't really have any chemistry. So it just made things kind of awkward and, not very believable. I don't want to be too critical of the actress, Deborah Raffin, because I think she was kind of put into a tight spot. She was okay, and she did the best job that she could have done, with that kind of very basic, bland material. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it just didn't work. And for me, honestly, it was, the whole romance was really kind of insignificant anyway. I just would have removed it and put more, murders and explosions and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this was a way to maybe pad out the runtime, insert this, romantic subplot and add some minutes to the runtime. But I don't know. It just didn't work for me. And another thing, really, I mean, if we're really going to be honest about it, Deborah Raffin, the actress, she was just too young and, just kind of too good looking for it to be believable that a woman like that at that age would be romantically interested in someone like Charles Bronson. Like from a visual standpoint, it seemed more like a father and daughter, not an actual couple. And so with that, it didn't work. And I just feel it was, kind of pointless. If the filmmakers were determined to, insert some romantic subplot like they did, then they could have done it. But the execution could have been far better, because ultimately they should have cast an older actress, someone maybe, in their late 40s, early 50s, somewhere around that age limit, to make it more believable. But as it stands, it just felt very, very cliche and, just kind of awkward. And so, ratings for Death Wish 3 from 1985. I'm going to be rating this movie a strong 6.5 out of 10. Death Wish 3 was a highly entertaining 80s action film with its bombastic and absurd premise. It's the ultimate vigilante fantasy with law enforcement teaming up, to take out the street thugs. Now, unlike the first two installments of the franchise, Death Wish 3 was unapologetic. It made no qualms about representing Paul Kersey as the hero. His actions were justified. The neighbors celebrated, the police, most of them were approved of his actions. And in that sense, there was absolutely no grey area. With all of that, I appreciated Death Wish 3 for what it was. Not what it was trying to do, but just for what it was. And as I said, it was that kind of unapologetic, here I am, take it or leave it, love it or hate it. And, even when you think about some of the themes that were in that film with, distrust in the police and urban decay, all that stuff is still very relevant in today's standards. If you've seen Death Wish 3, then please let me know your thoughts and memories in the comment section below. For all those out there who haven't seen this one yet, absolutely, it's a recommendation from me. Of course, if anyone out there has seen Death Wish 1 or 2 and hasn't seen this one yet, absolutely make it a priority. It's a must watch. For fans of 80s action, violent action, then yeah, I think you'll get a kick out of this one as well. Also, for Charles Bronson fans out there, yes, you have to check this one out. It's not necessarily his best performance as Paul Kersey. My favorite would be Death Wish 2, but I still thought that Bronson did a pretty solid job here and is definitely worth your time. And well, that is all from me today, guys. I do hope you've enjoyed this review of Death Wish 3 from 1985. I'll be back next week with another cult movie review. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, take care.